Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing happy, amazing and positive as always. So today I'm going to bring you guys part 2 of my Houses with Disturbing Backstories series. So this is a 3-part. I've already done part 1, so please go check that out before you continue to these ones. So in today's list I'm only going to do 3 houses because they are quite in depth, and I feel like you need to go in depth with these ones because there's just so much detail that wouldn't make sense if I left it out. Please brace yourselves. These ones are intense. You may have heard of them, you may not have heard of them, but please guys, viewers discretion is advised. Please know this. It's gory, it's violent, there's a lot of explicit and sexual details in this. If this triggers you, click out right now. Like, click out right now. Just letting you know that I did get all my information from the internet, so I do understand that not all pieces of information will be 100% accurate, but I've done my best to provide as accurate information as possible. And please know guys that all my true crime videos are for educational and awareness purposes only. So the first house that I'm going to be talking about today is Armin Meiwes' house. This man is also known as the Rottenburg Cannibal or the real life Hannibal Lecter. This house is where he killed and ate his victim with the victim's permission for sexual pleasure. To the outside world, Armin seemed like a very normal person. There was nothing that made him seem odd or weird or anything like that. This house is pretty much a mansion, a huge house located in Rottenburg, and it has 36 rooms. So not bedrooms, but 36 rooms in total. And the interior of it is mostly timber. It's quite dark and almost haunting looking. So, you know, this house doesn't look like your normal regular house. This actually looked kind of eerie. This house is located in kind of a remote area. There's not too many people around. There are neighbors around, but it's very isolated from the busy parts of the country. Armin was born on the 1st of December in 1961. He was born in Germany and he was an only child. He had 2 half-brothers from his dad's previous relationship. Armin was raised by his mother. She was a single mum because his dad didn't really have any interest in him at all, so he abandoned his son and his wife. So Armin never ever had any contact with his father ever again. Because of his father abandoning them, he felt like his family had fallen apart, and because of this he grew up to be quite a lonely child. So to cope with his loneliness, he actually invented an imaginary brother called Frankie, and he would talk to him as if he was a regular person in front of him and tell him all his secrets and confide in him also. Armin grew up to be a computer technician and he was openly a bisexual. Even though Armin was a grown man, his mother would intrude in his personal life quite a lot. She would often accompany him on dates that he went on, and he even had troop outings. So he was in the German army in 1980 and they would have troop outings, and his mother would often go with him to that as well. So I don't know if he was cool with this or if he really didn't like her but he couldn't really say anything because, you know, they only really had each other, so he just felt bad for her. I don't know, but she was really intrusive in his life. She kind of treated him as if he was just this little boy even when he was a grown man. In his adolescent years, he developed cannibalistic desires. He would often dream about what it would feel like to eat a human being, and he kind of got this sexual desire for this. He couldn't really confide in his friends about this, so he told his imaginary brother Frankie all about this weird and dark desire. His cannibalistic desires stemmed from the story of Hansel and Gretel. So that is where he gained this inspiration for eating human beings. He even fantasized about eating his friends so that they would never leave him. So he had fear of abandonment. In 1999, Armin's mother sadly passed away. He was 38 years old. He was really close with his mother. So when she passed away, he was obviously very devastated, but this is the first time in his life that he was truly alone. Not just alone in life, but alone in this big old house that he started decorating with his mother's memorabilia. So everywhere you would look, it would be a reminder of his mother. His loneliness took that much of a toll on him that he would lay a mannequin next to his pillow every night just so he felt a level of comfort. After his mother passed away, Armin developed a very, very high desire for pain and torture pornography. And that is where online he found a community of people that shared his desire for cannibalism. He spoke to about 200 people of his fantasies, and later on he claimed that there were thousands like him. In the year 2000, when he was 40 years old, he could no longer control his urges for cannibalism. So he went on a website called the Cannibal Cafe and placed an ad out. He was looking for a man between the ages of 18 to 35 years old with a normal build to be slaughtered and eaten with consent. He didn't place the ad as himself, he placed the ad as his imaginary brother Frankie. You would think that no one would ever be in their right mind to ever respond to an ad like this. But Armin received 200 responses. But as these people started talking to Armin about being slaughtered and eaten, they realized that they didn't actually want to be slaughtered and eaten. They just wanted to keep it online and just talk about it with random people who shared the same desires. So these 200 people backed out. So then finally for Armin, a man called Borg Jose responds and he accepts to be slaughtered and eaten. So this man goes off to Armin's house where he was minutes away from being slaughtered and eaten. He was literally laying on this table watching Armin as he was about to slaughter him. And then in the very last minute, he backs out. He was asked to be released from his restraints and Armin was like, "That's fine. I'm not going to force you into doing anything you don't want to do." Armin said later on that he would never kill anyone without their consent. Then he places the ad again and a 43-year-old man called Burned Brains responds. Byrne was also a bisexual. However, at the time he was in a relationship with a female. He had this very hidden secret desire to be eaten. Not slaughtered. He didn't want to be slaughtered as the ad said, but he said he wanted to be killed and eaten. After a month of messaging back and forth, Byrne goes to Armin's house in March of 2001. When he went inside the house, straight away the two had sex. Then Armin took Byrne to his slaughter room. Then Armin feeds this man with a bunch of sleeping pills, alcohol, and a whole bottle of cough syrup to sedate him. So when this man was finally sedated, Armin then sets up his video camera to get ready to film this whole thing. He attempted to castrate Byrne's genitals with his teeth. And as you can imagine, Byrne was bleeding profusely. Armin couldn't complete what he was trying to do to sever his genitalia, so he gets a kitchen knife and cuts it off. While Byrne was still conscious, he makes this really strange request to Armin that he and Armin eat his raw, severed genitalia together. So they tried to eat it together, however, it was just too chewy and too tough to eat raw. So then Armin goes to his kitchen and fries up the severed genitalia in some salt, pepper, wine, and garlic. And instead of frying it up in oil, he used some of Byrne's fat. So as he's cooking it up, he realizes it's way too burnt to be consumed. So he feeds it to his dog. So then Armin takes Byrne's body and places it in the bathtub, and he draws a warm bath for Byrne while Byrne was going in and out of consciousness for hours. Armin left the bathroom and went to his Star Trek book and would come back and forth from where he was to his bathroom to check on Byrne. Byrne was laying there bleeding out, slowly dying, drifting in and out of consciousness. And when Byrne went into an unconscious state, Armin decides to kill him. So Armin takes Byrne's body and hangs it off a meat hook. And with a final prayer and a last kiss to Byrne, Armin stabs Byrne in the neck. This entire 4-hour event was filmed. After Bernd had died, he then dismembered his body and placed parts of the body in his freezer, and he would defrost, cook and eat parts of his body over the span of 10 months. He decapitated Bernd's head and buried it in his garden. In 2002, a college student sees another ad placed by Armin on this website. He freaked out and he called the police to alert them. So the police went to Armin's house and arrested him based off of this tip-off. And when they searched his house, they found all the parts of the body and what he had been doing in his home. They found the videotape that he took of slaughtering and eating Bernd. The police watched it and it was also played in court. I mean, obviously this was horrific, and to make matters worse, the videotape was in HD quality, so you could see every detail. In 2004, he was convicted of manslaughter and he was sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. He admitted to what he did. I mean, obviously it was on tape, so you really had no choice. He also felt deep regret for doing this, and he also discourages people who have the same desires as him to go through with it. He was actually retried and sentenced to life imprisonment because a psychiatric that was examining him said that he still had these desires of killing and eating people, and he was a huge risk to society. He is now 60 years old, still in jail, and a vegetarian. The house still stands, and for 20 years it's been abandoned. It's in a very horrific condition. There's a lot of mess, decay. You couldn't even live in it if you tried. Apparently there was a fire in it years ago and there's a lot of burn damage from that as well. Okay, so that was the first house. That was so intense. I cannot believe that this is a true story. It just sounds like, you know, some kind of movie storyline. It just feels like this could not be real. For someone to actually consent to being eaten and slaughtered is just wild. Okay, so this next house, this is a case you would have actually heard of. It didn't happen too long ago, so it may still be in your memory. This is the house of Ariel Castro. This house is located on 2207 Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. This home is a two-story home with 4 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a basement. This house was built in 1890, however it was updated in 1959 and bought by Castro in 1992 for $12,000 USD. This house is where Ariel Castro raped, held captive, and tortured 3 women for over a decade before they managed to escape. Ariel was born in 1960 in Puerto Rico. His parents divorced when he was a child, so he was raised by a single mother. He, his mother, and his siblings moved to Pennsylvania, then to Cleveland, Ohio, so that he could be closer to his dad and his other family members. He had 9 siblings in total, including the siblings from his father's side, so he had half siblings as well. Castro also eventually got a girlfriend called Grimilda when he and his family moved pretty much across the road from them in 1980. Then together, when they got a bit more serious, they moved to this house in 2207 Seymour Avenue. Together, they had 4 kids, and it was not a happy relationship at all. Castro was a bus driver, and he was actually let go when he made an illegal U-turn with kids on board. He also used his bus for personal use, such as grocery shopping, which is absolutely not allowed. He also one time left a kid on board while he took his lunch break, and also he left his bus unattended while he went home to nap. When Grimilda and Ariel moved into this house, Grimilda suffered a tremendous amount of domestic violence. Castro would beat her up so badly, breaking her nose, her arm, her ribs, and causing a blood clot in her brain that resulted to a tumor that could not be cured, that was inoperable. He also threw her down a flight of stairs, and he was arrested for this, but there were no charges that were made. So Ariel, from a very early time in his life, was an absolute monster. Grimilda moved out in 1996 and took custody of her 4 kids because she could not deal with this any longer. However, as many domestic violence cases go, he then started to threaten her and actually attack her. So she took out a restraining order against him. He would often sometimes even take his daughters without the consent and permission of Grimilda, and this was just not on. Unfortunately, Grimilda passed away in April of 2012 because of complications of the brain tumor that Ariel gave to her. He was an absolute monster. He wanted to take control of women and be the domineering person that did evil things to women. And this is why he started kidnapping women and doing unthinkable things to them. He says he never planned to kidnap these women. However, the opportunity presented itself, so he took it. His first victim was a 21-year-old mother called Michelle Knight. On August of 2002, she was on the way to an appointment and she couldn't find the building, so she was asking around and no one could point her into the right direction. This is when she spotted Ariel Castro. She actually recognized Ariel because he was the father of someone that she knew. So when he offered to take her to this building, she thought there was no risk to this. She thought it was safe because she knew who he was. However, he started driving in the wrong direction. And he said to Michelle that I have some puppies at my house and you can take one of them and give to your son. And Michelle accepted. So when Michelle walked into the house, he pointed her to where the puppies were. There were no puppies. So she walked ahead of Ariel and walked into the direction of where she thought these puppies were. And when she went into the room, that is where he closed the door behind her and she would spend the next 11 years of her life held captive. His second victim was 17-year-old Amanda Berry. He actually kidnapped her the day before her 17th birthday on the 21st of April in 2003. Amanda was leaving her shift from Burger King at around 8 p.m. and she was walking home when she noticed a car was following her. And when she looked, it was Ariel Castro, who she also recognized. She recognized him as the father of one of her classmates from middle school. He said to her, "Oh, my daughter's at my house right now. Do you want to come see her?" So she accepted. She was like, "Yeah, sure." So she got into the car. And when they got to Ariel Castro's house, his daughter was nowhere to be seen. He said to her, "Oh, she must be in the bath or she must be doing something. Let's just wait." Of course, she never came and of course she wasn't there. And that is where she was held captive for the next 10 years of her life. She would be almost 30 before she got out. His third victim was 14-year-old Gina DeJesus, who was a friend of Ariel's daughter. She was actually on the way home from school from just seeing Ariel's daughter. Ariel's daughter wanted to sleep over at Gina's house this day. However, her mum said no. So Gina said goodbye to her friend and was walking home. And that is where she bumped into Ariel Castro. Ariel lured her in by saying that he was looking for his daughter and if she could help him find her. She was under the impression that he had come to collect her from school and drop her off to her mother's house. That was not the case. He then abducted her to his house, and that is where she too was held captive for 10 years. The lives of these three women were filled with fear, torture, pain, and ongoing sexual abuse for 10 years. They were all being held captive and restrained in the basement of Ariel's house before he started letting them live upstairs. They would be forced to go to the toilet in a bucket that Ariel rarely ever emptied out. He would slide their food in a hole in the door, and that is how they were fed. He would tempt their fate by opening doors and unlocking doors. So when one of the girls tried to escape, he would of course catch them and beat them up to a pulp. He also forced the girls to celebrate the anniversary of their abduction dates. So not only was it physical pain and torture, but it was also mental games. It was deep emotional pain that he was putting these girls through. Some girls were raped multiple times a day, and they would get socks shoved into their mouth to muffle their screams, and often he would just pump the music up really loudly so that anyone passing by or any of the neighbors couldn't hear them screaming. Years and years went by and they barely ever knew what day it was, what year it was, how long they were even held captive for. Michelle's son would grow up and she didn't get to be in his life for 10 years and watch him grow. To everyone that Castro knew, they thought of him as a very normal person. Nothing ever seemed off with him. He was friendly. He got along with people. No one in his neighborhood ever even got an idea that there were 3 girls abducted and held captive in his house for a whole decade. Amanda Berry would fall pregnant with Ariel Castro's baby, and she was forced to give birth in a kiddie pool so that she wouldn't mess his house. She did give birth to a healthy baby girl and she raised her really well. Oftentimes she would pretend as if she was walking her to school and just kind of doing things that felt a little normal so that she didn't go insane. Michelle would also fall pregnant at least 5 times, but the babies were never born, and Ariel would punch her stomach so hard that it caused permanent damage. Then finally in May of 2013, there was freedom at last for the girls. Ariel drove to McDonald's, forgetting to lock the doors behind him. The room that Amanda was held captive in was also unlocked when her daughter came running in saying, "Hey, I can't find Daddy. I don't know where Daddy is." This is when Amanda saw this as her opportunity to escape. She ran out of the room and ran towards the front door. However, she realized that it was actually wired. So if she opened it, an alarm would go off. So she found this gap and managed to take her arm out of it and wave for help. And she was screaming, saying, "I'm Amanda Berry. Please help me. Please help me." And luckily there was a passerby and heard her screams for help. He called 911 for her, and that is where she explained who she was and where she had been for 10 years. The police came banging through those doors, and the other 2 girls, Michelle and Gina, had no idea that Amanda had managed to escape and called the police. They were in their rooms thinking that this was just another day of being held captive. So when the police came banging through those doors, they thought that it was Castro coming in. They didn't know it was police. So when they finally found out that it was the police, you can imagine the relief that they had. Ariel was arrested that day and he was sentenced to life plus 1,000 years. So this guy was never going to be out in the streets ever again. He pleaded to the judge that he was not a bad guy, that he was just sick and he needed help, but the judge had absolute no sympathy for him whatsoever. He also said that sometimes the girls would ask him for sex and that the crimes were not as bad as they seemed. In 2013, to avoid his whole life being in jail, he took the coward's way out and hung himself in his jail cell with his bed sheets. 2207 Seymour Avenue has since been demolished, and for good reason. So that was the second house, guys, and the last house that I'm going to be talking about is, this is going to be intense. But this is the house of Fred and Rose West. The address, you may have heard of this, is 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, United Kingdom. This home is dark, it's dingy and eerie. It just gives you the creeps, and not just even knowing what happened there, but it just looks like a creepy house. This was actually a council house before Fred West purchased it from the government for £7,000. Fred, born in 1941, was an English serial killer who raped, murdered, and tortured at the very least of 12 victims with his wife, Rose, who was born in 1953. And majority of these evil murders and torturous acts occurred at this house. Rose met Fred just a little after her 15th birthday. She was at a bus stop in 1969 where Fred just so happened to be as well. He was 27 years old. At first, Rose didn't like him. She thought he was scruffy and rugged and that he didn't take care of himself. However, he gave her a lot of attention, and then she started to actually enjoy his attention. It is also said that she actually molested her brothers. And it is also said that she actually raped her 12-year-old brother. Soon after they met, they began a relationship. Fred lived in a caravan park with his biological daughter from a previous marriage called Anna Marie and his stepdaughter, 8-year-old Charmaine. When Rose met them, she realized that they were very neglected. So initially she nurtured them and she took care of them. She also left her job at the bread shop to take care of her boyfriend's kids. So essentially she was a full-time nanny to them. Rose's parents hated Fred with every bone in their body. They thought that he was too old. Obviously he's almost 30 and she's 15. They thought of him to be very arrogant and a pathological liar. Even though her parents forbid her from dating Fred, she didn't listen and she continued this relationship. So her parents actually reported Fred to social services. Her parents also heard that she was prostituting herself. So she was actually placed in a home for troubled teens in 1969. When she was released from this home, she was 16 years old and she waited for Fred, who was in jail for 30 days serving a sentence for petty theft and unpaid fines. And when he was released, they moved out together. In 1970, Rose fell pregnant with Fred's baby and she was actually placed into care. Her father said that either you terminate your pregnancy and you can come back and live with us, your family again, or you keep the baby and you are to never set foot into the family home ever again. She chose to keep the baby and live with Fred. She gave birth to a daughter called Heather in October of 1970. In December of 1970, so a couple months after their daughter was born, Fred went to jail for theft, and there he served a 6-month sentence where he was out in June of 1971. Anna Marie said that her and Charmaine were physically and emotionally abused while under the care of Rose. Charmaine always remained optimistic that her real mother would come and rescue her, saying that real mummy will come and save us. Rose hated Charmaine because she was the more rebellious one out of her and Anna Marie. There was also a time when Charmaine's friend came to their house and she found her friend Charmaine bound and gagged and naked, standing on a chair while Rose stood behind her with a wooden spoon, punishing her. Charmaine would also go to hospital from the injuries that she sustained when Rose would punish her, and Rose would justify it by saying that it was something that happened in the house, a household accident. While Fred was in jail, Charmaine went missing. That is because Rose murdered her. And while Fred was in jail, Rose stored Charmaine's body in the cellar of the house that they lived in at the time. And when Fred was released, he took his stepdaughter's body and buried her in the backyard. And if anyone asked about Charmaine's whereabouts, they would tell them that Charmaine went to live with her mother, and they even told the school that she attended to this as well. And it is said that parts of Charmaine's body was severed to keep as keepsakes. In 1972, Fred and Rose got married and no one was in attendance. A few months later, she would fall pregnant with their second daughter, and that is when they moved to 25 Cromwell Street. This home, Rose would dedicate one room to her prostituting, and the couple together would explore their sexual fantasies with other people. They had lodgers that lived upstairs, so they also included the lodgers in their sexual fantasies. There were peepholes around this bedroom where Fred would actually look through and watch Rose. They would assert dominance with their sexual partners and take their sexual partners over their sexual limits. They would also incite a lot of pain. They had a collection of bondage items. They also had lots of videos of pornography and bestiality, and also child abuse. They also kept a lot of restraining devices to use on clients and their sexual partners. Fred would also film his wife participating in sexual acts and then show their children later on. By 1983, Rose would have 8 children. 3 of them were conceived by her clients. Fred decided that he was going to accept the kids as his own. The Wests treated their kids so badly to the point there were about 31 hospital visits in total. They would have puncture wounds to their feet and also their daughter's genitals. One of the daughters actually fell pregnant with Fred's baby because he would rape them, and she also contracted an STD from him as well. One of the sons was choked until he was unconscious by Rose. He was left with bruises on his neck and popped blood vessels on his eyeballs. In the cellar of this house, Anna Marie was repeatedly raped by Rose and Fred. She would be strapped in this metal frame that was constructed by Fred so that Rose could sexually abuse Anna Marie. In 1972, Rose and Fred would abduct their first victim. Rose sexually abused this girl in the car, and also this victim was punched in the face by Fred where she became unconscious. Then the couple took this victim to their house and dragged her to the cellar of the house where Rose and Fred further assaulted her and sexually abused her. This victim was released and she went to the police. When it was time to punish them, they were let go with a £75 fine. Now that they knew the risks that the victims could place them in, they were to be extra careful now. So what they would do is torture their victims, and instead of releasing them, they would kill them and bury them within this property. The couple together or separately went on to abduct, torture and kill at least 12 girls. They were sexually tortured, binding these victims up with masking tape, killing them, dismembering them, and burying them in a cellar that was later used as their children's bedroom. 18-year-old Anne McFall is said to be the first victim of Fred's alone. It is said that she was pregnant with maybe Fred's baby, and she was actually the first nanny to his kids from his previous marriage. Her remains were found in a field in Kempsey. Catherine Rena Costello was Fred's first wife and mother to Charmaine. This was Fred's second victim. She was killed by Fred when she came to get Charmaine. However, Charmaine was nowhere to be seen because she had been murdered by Rose. So to avoid being investigated, Fred went on to murder her, and her body was also found in a field in Kempsey. 19-year-old Linda Go was the first victim that the couple tortured and killed together. Her dismembered remains were found in the bathroom of 25 Cromwell Street. Rose and Fred tortured, sexually abused, and killed her by strangulation. The next victim was Carol Ann Cooper. Her body was found in the cellar of 25 Cromwell Street. She went missing after boarding a bus from a night out at the movies and was abducted by Rose and Fred. The next victim was 21-year-old Lucy Partington. The couple abducted her while she awaited a bus at a bus stop. She was kept alive and tortured for several days before being murdered. Her dismembered body was found in the floor of the cellar on 25 Cromwell Street. The next victim was 21-year-old Teresa Seigenthaler. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing her last name wrong. The 21-year-old student was abducted in 1974 by the Wests when she was set out hitchhiking. Her remains were found under the floor in the cellar of 25 Cromwell Street. The next victim was Shirley Hubbard, the youngest victim of the Wests. She was just 15 years old when she disappeared when traveling home from work experience. Her remains were found under the floor in the cellar. Her head was completely covered in tape with 2 plastic tubes coming out of her nostrils so that she could breathe while Rose and Fred tortured her. The next victim was called Juanita Mott. She was taken by the Wests in 1975 when traveling to Gloucester a day before her friend's wedding. Her remains were found in the cellar of 25 Cromwell Street. She was a former lodger of 25 Cromwell Street. The next victim was Shirley Ann Robinson. She was a 19-year-old, also a former lodger. She was 8 months pregnant with Fred's child, and it is said that Shirley was Fred's lover. Her and her unborn baby's remains were found buried in the garden of 25 Cromwell Street, and it is said that Rose actually took out the unborn baby from Shirley's stomach. The next victim was called Alison Chambers, a 16-year-old regular visitor of 25 Cromwell Street. Her remains were found in the back garden. The next victim was called Heather West. Yes, Fred and Rose's very own daughter. Her body was the first to be recovered by police. She was tied up, raped, mutilated, and buried in the patio of the backyard. Her body was the last one to be buried on 25 Cromwell Street. It is said that when Anna Marie left the house, the focus then went on to Heather, and she was raped and tortured by her parents. The couple explained Heather's disappearance by saying that she had ran off with her lesbian lover, and they said this because her father Fred would say, if you are rejecting sexual advances from me, then you must be a lesbian. These victims were just the victims who have been confirmed that were killed by the Wests. It is said that they have also killed more, however the bodies have never been found. Most of the bodies were found decapitated or dismembered. The lodgers that lived upstairs would often hear the screams of the victims. However, they didn't want to intrude, and when they did ask Rose and Fred, they would justify it by saying it was their kids screaming from nightmares. In 1992, the couple's youngest daughter confided in her friend that she was being raped by her father, and he had also videotaped sexually abusing her, and her friend heard this and went straight to her mum, where her mother anonymously called the police. The police actually got a search warrant when Fred was also accused of rape by another girl. Fred would also joke to his kids saying, if you guys misbehave, you're going to end up in the patio like Heather. That is also another thing that the police heard that were like, okay, we need to go and search this house. The police went, searched the house. They found all the bodies, and it was just a horrific sight. Fred was arrested for rape and sodomy of a minor, and Rose was arrested as an accomplice. When police discovered the gruesome scene, they just could not believe their eyes. They found the cellar that they had been doing all these horrific things in. All the evidence, such as the bodies, were recovered. They found porn material, torture devices, child abuse material. The list just goes on and on. Fred was charged of 12 murders. However, before he could even enter the trial and be sentenced, he took his own life by hanging himself in his cell. Rose was charged with 10 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. She is now 68 years old and still in prison. It is suspected that there are bodies of more victims of Rose and Fred. However, their bodies have not yet been found. There has been more suspected cases, but nothing confirmed yet. How these two were not caught earlier is a mystery. How were they getting away with this for 20 years? 25 Cromwell Street was knocked down in 1996 and has been replaced with a garden and a footpath where people do walk in and out from all the time. So that was my list for today. I know this was a little bit longer and more detailed, but I needed to go in depth more with these cases because they were just so horrific and needed to be spoken about. Please guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It will help me out so much. Please stay tuned for part 3. There will be a part 3 which will be the final part of this series, and please let me know if you guys have any other ideas of any series that I could do. I'm actually really enjoying doing series, so please let me know. Please leave any suggestions down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please stay happy, please stay amazing, please stay positive, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.